All right, y'all, we're live. What's going on? So we're back with AP World tonight. So if you can hear me and if you can see me, introduce yourself in the chat. What's going on? Where are you guys from? Where are you at? I'm actually gonna post a quick poll. Curious of like what, actually you can just post this in the chat. What are you studying in your class right now? So not like what chapter number or anything like that, because I don't know all the book chapter numbers, but what are the topics that you are currently studying in your AP World class? It's kind of helpful for us to know, what you guys are focused on, just so that we can make sure that we're doing topics that are exactly what you need. So we're sort of paced out right now to be in the post-classical era, which is hopefully where everybody is. But it's helpful to know. So if you could just post in the chat as just like an intro question, like what are you studying in AP World right now? What are the topics that you are studying? So maybe it's post-classical Africa, which is perfect. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Maybe you're just reviewing something else. You guys are quiet tonight. There's definitely a bunch of you in here. Crusades. Awesome. Okay, so just to give you guys a quick rundown of this platform, if this is your first time here, the chat is for you. You can talk to each other. You can talk to me. I'll look at it sometimes, but it can get a little crazy. So mostly if you have questions that you really want to make sure that I answer, post them where it says ask a question. And that will be nice and clear, and it kind of like, creates a list. So I'll come back to that towards the end. And I'll also be able to timestamp your questions so that in a replay, you can go right back to where that question was answered, which is pretty cool. So we've been doing free live sessions for quite a while, September and October. Pretty soon, the free sessions are not going to happen anymore, and instead the live sessions are only for Fiveable members. So right now, if you click the button that says replays and future live sessions, that way you can sign up to become a member so that you don't lose any of the access. So we've already done a whole bunch of live reviews in World, and we've got plenty more to do for the rest of the year. So we're really trying to help you guys make sure you're ready to go for your AP exam. All right, so let me just focus the screen on the slides. There we go. Okay, so all right, so we're going to talk about post-classical Africa today. And this is usually, it's one of those things that like you really need to know about because it's an entire continent and, an entire time period. But there's like really some key things that will come up. Like you will see them on your AP exam somewhere, whether it's some type of essay question or multiple choice, it will come up. And one of the things I'm going to kind of loop back to is about Black Panther. So if you've seen Black Panther, this is very much like, even though, of course, Black Panther is fiction, there are a lot of similarities between, what is his name, King T'Challa and Mansa Musa, who I'm going to talk about today. And so even though it's fiction, even though it's Marvel, I think you could totally use Black Panther to understand post-classical Africa, which is kind of fun. So, okay, so if you're not following us on social media, definitely do that at Think Fiveable, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on YouTube. On YouTube, I have key concept videos for every single key concept in AP World, which are 19, and that will help tell you exactly what you have to know, exactly what College Board has identified as these things will be on the test. So, all right, so let's first get into a little bit about the spread of Islam. So I'm going to do a whole session on Islam. I kind of reordered things a little bit, but just a quick reminder. So if you haven't yet studied Islam, this is a crucial topic in Unit 3. When you look at post-classical era, it's really all about the expansion of trade and of empires and, influence and all of these different things. And so, So, understanding Islam and how it begins and how it spreads is so important because it's really a big factor in the rise of trade. Trade in this era is going to expand way beyond what it looked like in the classical era, in a big part due to Islam, because Muslims tend, in this faith, this idea of merchants and trade is very much favored. And so because of that, there's a lot of merchants that are moving around and spreading Islam and trading all kinds of other stuff. And so that's super important. So, if you look at this map, you can see that, obviously Islam is going to get into Northern Africa relatively quickly, right after it is founded. And then from there, it's going to diffuse throughout the rest of Africa, in part because of migrations, because of trade, and because people are interacting with each other more. And so as we kind of go through some of the important post-classical African empires, it's just really important that you remember that Islam is a defining characteristic of these empires and of this time period. So, it comes up in like every single chapter in like post-classical era, essentially. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of take you through, I'm actually using the AMSCO textbook. If you are looking for a prep book, I definitely recommend AMSCO. It's sort of this like in between of a textbook and a prep book. It's like one of those things. It's shorter than your textbook, but it actually includes like everything you actually have to know. So it's pretty good. So a quick review first of the Bantu migration. So Bantu is essentially a language, right? It's a group of people that's based on the common language that they have. And so the Bantus, you can see right here, this is where their hearth is, right? This is their like homeland where they kind of begin. And then they start to migrate all throughout sub-Saharan Africa. So keep in mind, sub-Saharan Africa is underneath the Saharan desert. Okay, so all of this entire portion of the continent is, part of the Bantu migration. And so there are lots of languages in this region that have Bantu influence, right? And are part of that like language and that culture. And it really, even though like all the different people across Africa are very different, there's so many different cultures, so many different languages, different ethnicities, different everything. In this region, you see a lot of Bantu connections between all the different groups. And actually, I was pretty shocked. I did a Ancestry.com DNA, and I actually found out that I have 4% of Bantu DNA in me, which is just like wild. And so I have no idea where exactly that comes from, but I would imagine that there's a lot of people that have that connection, right? And a lot of people within Africa and that are connected to like African diaspora. So, anyone that has some sort of ancestry of slaves, right? So, or of any sort of migrants from this region could have Bantu DNA, which is pretty cool. So, okay, so as they're moving around and they're moving, migrations, there's a lot of reasons to migrate, but in this case, they're migrating because of a lot of it has to do with environmental factors of sort of like overgrazing. You kind of have to shift with the environment because a lot of these early migrations are happening before there's like really strong foothold on agriculture. But even then, there's sort of this like mix of like pastoral nomads. And so there's migrations that are happening in part because of environmental factors. And so as they're moving around, though, they are spreading agricultural techniques with them and crops. And so one of the biggest important ones is bananas. So as bananas spread, they actually lead to the population increasing because bananas are healthy, right? So you can grow them and then eat them, and more people, more food always equals more people. That's one of the things that I'm always talking about. So because there's more food, the population will increase. And then because the population increases, then that leads to other issues too, right? So more people then equals more conflict. So because there's more people, they have to share resources. There's more competition. And so both of those things are super important because that's going to characterize, thousands of years of history in this region because of these migrants, right? And the food, and these are like long-term effects of that. Mostly they were kind of using technology. They were using a whole bunch of different technologies, but two of the ones that you can know are the canoes that they would use. And so you can see all the rivers around like where they're migrating, right? You have the Congo, the Zambezi, the Nile, all these different rivers that are around here, massive rivers. And so they were using canoes to travel along the rivers. And iron making is another key point. This is something that the Bantu migrants really mastered the tool of iron. And with that, we're able to create like really sophisticated weapons. And so that's another characteristic of the Bantus. They also spread disease with them, as every migrants do, or every trade patterns. When people come into contact, disease can also come into contact. And so as people of Bantu migrants kind of encountered natives of the different places they were in, they brought malaria with them, right? And these natives, maybe some of them did not have any experience or any immunity to malaria. And so as soon as they come into contact with that disease that they don't have immunities to, that's where you're going to start to see the spread of disease. So it's very similar to what happens in the Americas, right? As Europeans come into contact with Native Americans, if you come into contact with a disease that you are not immune to, but the other person has immunity to it, that's a problem. A little bit about Bantu societies. They were mostly small bands. They're matrilineal, which means it's based on like your family tree and like your almost like not power structure, but you're really looking at the lineage based on the mother rather than the father. So it doesn't mean that the women were making the decisions. They were still a patriarchal society, but there was a lot of value on the like lineage of the mother. They practice this like mixture between like monotheistic and a spiritual religion, where like they believe that there is one God, but they also believe that like everything on earth is spiritual and is like a creation of that God. So it's not really like, it's not very similar to other monotheistic religions, but it does have that in common. And then there's a very popular storytelling tradition. This is really their oral history. And so a lot of what we know about Bantus are because they told stories and then eventually someone wrote them down. Okay, let me just look over and see what kind of questions we got. Let's see. All right, I'll come back to these questions. Okay, so moving forward, so Bantu is a big part of this because it connects so much of the continent. But if we kind of look at Africa in this time period, and you can see on this map, so all the different colors are representing empires, like where empires were at this time. And so there's plenty of Africa that is not like part of some sort of centralized empire, right? There's like Africa is huge. Like, do not forget how massive this continent is. And so there are tons of people that aren't part of any of these empires. And so what the politics looks like for those people is mostly decentralized. And even in some of these empires too, where you don't have a central hub, right? A central like capital city in, like a king or an emperor. So a lot of people were more formed in these like kin-based networks, right? These are like families governing themselves. And they typically have like a male governing in them because patriarchy. But as the population increases more and more, there's more competition, and so they start to fight more, right? And so eventually you do start to see empires forming as like people sort of bind together, right? We're safer in numbers. So it's kind of a wild time, like even up in here, like there's quite a few different empires forming and, they don't always get along. So this is definitely, there's a lot going on here. And then in this time period too, and I'll talk about camels in a second. I saw the camel emojis listed because camels really like help connect so much of Africa to Europe and Asia, right? So even though it's not that far relatively between here where all of this commerce and all of this stuff is happening, and here where all the Islamic empires are, it's not very easy to get there because all of this in here is desert. So in order to get there, you have to have the technology to help you do that. And camels are one of the factors because camels don't need as much water, right? You're not going to be able to do it on a horse. You can do it on a camel. And so, in this time period, you're going to see a lot of new technologies just based around the camel. There's like 25 different camel saddles. I was reading about a few of them today. And to be honest, I thought there was like one type of camel saddle, but there's a lot of them, and they all serve different purposes based on sort of like location and geography and climate. And it's so, so basically being able to connect these two zones, getting across this trans-Saharan trade network that opens up is massive, because that's a lot of stuff, a lot of people, a lot of ideas, a lot of influence that's now being connected to this area here. Okay. All right, so let's look at some of the empires. Oh, I guess I had a little bit more on Islam's impact on trade. And then I'll just go into the questions. So if you have a question, take a second, add it in, and I'm gonna go and answer a few of them in a few minutes. Okay, so we talked about Islam spreading in this time period, and the fact that it was so important for trade, the growth of trade. And so just to really hit this point again, after the classical era, when you have those empires fall, trade, pretty much not totally stops, but it really slows down, because you don't have these massive empires to trade, right? And you don't have people to keep it safe. And so there is a lull in trade between, 400, 300, 400, and 600, right? 700. And that's because there isn't really someone to do it. And so with the rise of Islam and then the spread of Islam, trade is being rejuvenated everywhere. So if you ever looking at it like a CCOT of this time period, trade is your change, right? It's really like coming back. And in the trans-Saharan networks in that North Africa region, it's, camels coming in from the Middle East are really the factor. Like that makes the difference. Most of what was traded in that region is gold, salt, ivory, slaves. Okay, so memorize those 4 things. Those are like kind of always the things that are being traded from Africa. On the east coast of Africa, this is where the African continent meets the Indian Ocean. So they're very, very connected to Indian Ocean trade. You see these like coastal cities like Mogadishu and Kilwa, and they're thriving because just like in the rest of the Indian Ocean, people are staying there. Merchants will stay in those cities to wait for the monsoon winds. So, you've got these like cities where people are there for quite some time. So they're sharing ideas, they're talking to each other, building new things. And so that's a big part of what East Africa looks like. And so they're exporting the same things, right? Ivory, gold, slaves. Another factor on the East Coast is also transferring exotic animals, right? Like rhinos or giraffes or any elephants, any of these massive animals that we sort of see kind of around the world now, even like zoos. They're being exported around, not necessarily just starting this time, but the reason why they're mostly on the Indian Ocean is because you would want to put them on a ship, right? Going over land with exotic animals can't be easy. So that's an export. And then they're importing things from China, like porcelain and cotton from India. So there really is this international trade that's going on in this time period, in this region, where you can see all the different connections between places. Okay, all right, let's look at some questions. Okay, what is the Eurasian equivalent? Dan, I'm not sure what you're asking there, so if you could just comment on that, just kind of clarify. Would malaria have a significant impact on population? Yes. I mean, any type of new disease to a region will have a big impact, right? It's kind of shifting the ecology of a place. So every single time you build immunities to diseases that you're around, to different types of infections. We all have that. And so if you then go to a place and you've contracted one of those things, even if you're not sick from it, and you give it to someone who's never come into contact with that, it's a problem. And so, yes, it did have a shift on population. I don't know what the actual numbers are for this, but it does affect it. Can I send out the slides? Yes, I will email you all the slides as soon as I'm done. So, woo. Let's see. How were interregional traders an impact on this era? Okay, so the answer on here, so traders in terms of like merchants impact this era. You know, they are the impact on this era because of any of, like, when you look at the spread of any of the religions like Islam or Buddhism, or Christianity that are going to spread quite a bit in this time period, you know, you can really look to merchants for that, right? Like, think about in those like port cities, people waiting for monsoons, they're trading ideas with each other always, and so that's a huge factor. And then also just the movement of goods around the world, or at least around Eurasia, is massive. So like we talked about bananas, you know, just the introduction of bananas in Africa changes the demographics of Africa, right? It increases the population. So because of merchants, there are massive changes throughout the world, really. Okay. How did trade in period 3 with the influence of Muslims change from period 2? So it just expands. So there's just way more trade in period 3 than there is in period 2. It's like the same trade routes. Like all the trade routes that we're talking about existed in the second time period, but it all gets way more. Like more people are trading, more goods are being traded. There's bigger impacts from those things, right? So everything is just like exaggerated in period 3. All right, so keep giving me questions as I go. Okay, let's look at each. So when you talk about post-classical Africa in AP world, there's pretty much like the three major West African empires. That's Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And then there's the East Africa, like Swahili states, and Zimbabwe. And so those are your, like, you know, post-classical African empires to know. So a little bit about Ghana. It's not located in the same place as modern day Ghana. These are different things. But Ghana is sort of the first of the post-classical West African empires. You can see there where it's located. And it really is like peaking during like the 8th and 11th century. So right in this time period, like this is when Ghana is in its high, you know, highest point. They would sell gold and ivory to Muslim traders and then exchange that for salt, copper, cloth, and tools. And Ghana was centralized. It had a king, it had a capital city, and then it had a massive army with iron weapons. So, you know, you can even see some like influence of Bantus in there, right? That iron. So Ghana is in one of the interesting pieces. So they are connected to, they're like connected to the world, right? There's Muslim traders coming in, there's merchants from Ghana going out. And so they have these like imports and exports. However, it's like, it's sort of in this, like, people don't know how wealthy things were there. So it's sort of hidden, you know, like in this time period. It's not like the Europeans knew that there was like this wealth of power and money like right here. And that's sort of like similar to like Black Panther, right? Whereas like they're sort of this like this hidden gem, you know, like they're keeping their wealth a secret. It's kind of similar here, where it's not super obvious to everyone else that like things are going well in Ghana. All right, so when Ghana eventually will fall, and the next empire is Mali, and Mali becomes even more wealthy than Ghana was. And there's a reason for that. So it's Sundiata that founded Mali, the Mali Empire. You know, after Ghana declined, there was sort of this window of opportunity. And so this is founded by Sundiata. And so one of the interesting things is that in Mali, they were profiting off of the gold trade, right? They had so much gold that they're making a ton of money on the gold, but they also were taxing pretty much everything that was entering West Africa. And that was different than Ghana. Ghana didn't necessarily tax everything, right? So they were profiting from what was coming in, but not necessarily because of taxes. But Mali was taxing everything. And so because of this, they become like insanely prosperous. This is maybe one of the richest empires that ever existed. And especially with, Mansa Musa, who we'll talk about in a second, is one of the leaders. And he's like the richest guy who ever lived. Like, even accounting for inflation, it's way wealthier than anyone today, right? Even like, Bezos or Gates or any of these like massively wealthy people. And so within Mali, most of the people who lived there were farmers, and they cultivated things like rice and sorghum. They had these like massive cities like Timbuktu and Gao, and they really became these centers of Islam. Islam is a very, very popular religion in Mali at this time. And then eventually Mali will go into decline, and the Songhai Empire is what replaces the Mali Empire. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about Songhai. It's a lot of very similar characteristics as the rest. But I am going to talk about Mansa Musa, because when you think about people in history who were doing the absolute most, like Mansa Musa is your guy. Like, look at this like portrait. He was just so wealthy that it's like, I don't even think he knew what to do with all of his money. So it's Sundiata's grand nephew. So there is a relation here. And he is what he's so popular for and famous for is the influence on Islam that he had in West Africa. So because he was a devout Muslim, he got others to convert too. It's very similar to like Ashoka with Buddhism in India, right? Like the way the practice of the leader matters a lot to the people, because people follow the leaders, right? Those are your influencers. Like, think about today. Like, you think about people who are influencing culture, on social media, on TV, on movies and music and all kinds of different things. And we follow their lead. It's similar. Like, for him, he's in charge. So he's got influence over everyone. And he used that influence to promote Islam. So in 1324, he makes this pilgrimage to Mecca, right? Which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, is to, at some point in your life, to make this pilgrimage to the holy city. So he goes on this pilgrimage, and with him, though, he takes this like caravan he brought all kinds of like servants and slaves with him to give away and to work for him. But they all were they brought so much gold with them. And one of the things that they did is that when they got to places like Cairo, they just started giving away all this gold to people who they saw who needed it, people who were poor. And this is another like connection with Black Panther, where, by the end of the film, when they're helping like Oakland, it's kind of similar, right? It's like, okay, as a community, as an empire, we have so much. Can we help others? It's kind of similar here. But one of the interesting things too is that he actually gave away so much gold in Cairo that it led to like massive inflation, which kind of wrecked the Egyptian economy for like a decade. So like that, just to like give you a sense of like, that's how much gold he was actually giving away. So it's just it's like insane. And and as he's going out and doing that, he's really just like also kind of flaunting the wealth, right? And so if you didn't know just how wealthy Mali was, now you know, because this like gold, came through. So it kind of is, eventually sort of leads to the demise of Mali, but ultimately his legacy is strengthening Islam, right? And all the different effects that has on trade and society and everything. So Mansa Musa. All right, looks like we got a few more questions. Okay. What system of government governed these West African empires? So most of them would have been like a monarchy type system, right? So Mansa Musa, for example, was a king, was an emperor. And so there's like one person in charge of everybody else. I don't know much about like too many other details of their politics. the empires themselves were centralized. Like Mali was centralized. It has one government that is governing everyone else. It has a main city, capital city, but that's pretty much the details you need to know. Has anyone ever tried to invade Mali? So I'm not 100% sure. I think Mali kind of fell. I'm not sure exactly what led to the demise of Mali, but it wasn't I don't think it was a direct overthrow of them. I don't think it was an invasion. But I do know that there is evidence that after Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, they found plans. They've uncovered European plans to get to Mali that I don't think were even used. It seems like things maybe shifted. I don't know. It's a little bit beyond my knowledge of Mali, but good question. Okay. All right. So Mansa Musa, the most extra of any emperor that you'll ever study. Pretty dope though. Okay, so on the east coast of Africa, we talked about Zimbabwe and the Swahili states. And so these were far more decentralized rather than centralized. But you do have you do have centers, right? So this one here, for example, this is actually in modern day Zimbabwe as well. And so this is just these defensive walls that you can see that still exist. Okay, so let's talk about women. So oftentimes you'll see prompts, whether it's in a short answer question or some sort of comparison, and even just in your class. I haven't seen one on this on the exam yet, but it totally could be where you're comparing women's roles. And one of the options you'll get is sub-Saharan Africa. So, it's important to kind of know some of the characteristics. So just like other societies at that time, and really every time, at all times, it's a patriarchal society, right? It's men that are making the decisions, and it's men that are primarily in charge, politically, economically. That's pretty much what it looks like. Some of the societies are matrilineal, like we talked about, where you do trace your ancestry through the mother, not through the father. But that's not the same as matriarchal. There are some smaller tribes in different places that are matriarchal, where there is a woman in charge. But these bigger empires are not matriarchal; they're patriarchal. So there is some specifics to West African women, or sub-Saharan African women, in terms of their connections or their opportunities, right? So to be a woman in this time, in this place, what opportunities did you have, even though you were living in a patriarchal society that limited your opportunities? There was a tradition of inheritance being passed. Instead of as a man to your sons, you would pass it to your sister's sons. So that's kind of an interesting twist, where as a sister, you did have some power, some opportunity that was given to you. A second thing is that even though Islam is very popular in sub-Saharan Africa as well, Muslim women in West Africa don't actually veil themselves all the time. Some do and some don't. And so there's some debates about why, and it's just sort of unclear. I think that there is some evidence that women in the Middle East did veil themselves even before Islam started, which I think questions whether or not that tradition is kind of based in culture that's beyond religious, right? So if that's the case, then this kind of explains some of this. So, it's just like Islam looks different, even though it's the same religion, it looks different in different places, because every religion is also influenced by culture of where you are. So, being a Muslim isn't necessarily the same thing everywhere. It can look a little bit different in different places because culture matters. So it looks a little bit different here. I'm not sure. Okay, so 2 more things. So let's talk about slavery. one of the things that's really important for you to understand, like very, very much understand, is that slavery is not unique to Africa. It is not the only story of Africa, right? The like history in Africa does not start at slavery. There's so much more to it. So, and also like African kings and Africans had their own systems of slavery. It wasn't just Europeans that enslaved them. And a lot of times they're enslaving each other as well. So it's a really complicated issue. It's not a simple, term and thing. So, one of the things I kind of wanted to just show you is that there are different types of slavery, right? It's not just, slavery isn't even just one thing. So when you think of the slavery that occurred in the Americas, right, that like slave trade from Africa, and then the slaves that existed like in the United States, in Brazil, in the Caribbean, this is really what chattel slave, this is a form of chattel slavery. And so essentially what chattel slavery is, slaves become the legal property of the owner. So chattel slavery is when a person becomes property. So this is really what you see in the Americas later, and we'll talk about that later. It's permanent, so like you can't get out of that, right? There's nothing you can do to like earn your freedom unless your like owner decides that you are now free. But they own you, so that's up to them. It's passed down, so children of slaves are also slaves, and then slaves have no rights, like chattel slaves have no rights. Okay, so another form would be like domestic slavery. This is more common in like Greece and Rome and the Middle East. This was what you saw in like the classical era. So in this case, slaves would serve as like household workers, right? So cooks, cleaners, other types of workers. It was oftentimes permanent, but not necessarily. It's oftentimes hereditary, but not necessarily. This is sort of like an in-between, yeah. And then in terms of rights, they have some. Sometimes laws or customs would like prevent the master from selling them. And so it's kind of changed a little bit. Also worth noting that while in the United States and in the Americas, like all the slavery that happened here was based on race, right? It was this racial hierarchy that was created to really like, justify enslaving people. For domestic and for debt bondage, it has nothing to do with race. It has a lot more to do with like class, and especially like if you're like a prisoner of war, then you could be enslaved. It had nothing to do with race though. Okay, so the third one, this is what is popular in Africa, is debt bondage. And so this basically means that you become a slave through some agreement to repay a debt. And so this is very like, widespread in Africa in this like post-classical era. And so you're not like, in theory, it's not permanent. It's like, I need this much money, so I will work for this long. And so in theory, as soon as you worked that long, you've worked off your debt and now you're free. But a lot of slaves never actually reach that point. Sometimes the point keeps moving. There's like interest, or it was never really agreed on. And same thing, like in theory, you would work off your debt so your children would not be a part of that agreement. But oftentimes children inherit their parents' debt, right? It matters, like you have the similar experience. And then same thing with like rights. They have some rights. They're not just considered property, but and sometimes things would like protect them in terms of like punishments. So, okay, so that's pretty much it. I know like the last slide I had was just a picture of Black Panther. We talked about it a little bit. It's like, I just think it's kind of cool. Like if you go back and rewatch Black Panther and you're thinking about post-classical Africa, you can see a lot of influences there, like the king, like T'Challa is very similar to Mansa Musa in a lot of ways. Very wealthy, very much like as he's traveling is giving back, there's all types of different connections. And then even like the people that you see that live in Wakanda, a lot of farmers, a lot of like, just like we talked about, like the people of Mali were a lot of farmers. the fact that there's sort of this like hidden empire with like insane wealth that the world doesn't really know about is a lot of the same story of Mali too, right? It's like this massively wealthy empire that the world didn't really know about. And it's like they're trying, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting that you do see these similarities between these things. And I think it's really cool to be able to make those connections because it will make the history make a lot more sense. So, all right. So those of you that are sticking around, any other questions that you'd like me to touch on, add them to the list and I will talk about them. Let's see. Let me close this. I don't need that picture anymore. So I'm going to be, next week, we'll talk more about Islam. I think we'll do Islam. I'm trying to, if you guys have any requests of like topics for next week, I'm just trying to get it so that we're really like doing exactly what you need, so I don't want to get too far ahead, or be too far behind. Like ideally we are aligned perfectly to your class schedule. So if you know what you're going to study next week and you have any requests, please put them in the chat and I will do what I can. Let's see. Okay. Any other questions, add them in. And if you want access to these replays, you'll need to become a member of Fiveable. So you can click that link below. It's fiveable.me/live. So it's really important that you do that so that you have access to everything for the month of October. So this is going to end in a few days. It's $20 for AP World. So if that's the only AP you're taking, it's like insanely reasonable for live tutoring essentially. So you can come in every Monday night and get your questions answered all year, plus all kinds of last minute advice during like when we get closer to the test. All right, y'all. So it's been real. I'm super glad that we got to do this tonight. I think it's just so important to learn about the whole world. And it's sad to me that like everything that I'm getting into right now is going to be cut from the AP World exam. So learn about it, take in what you can, and enjoy. Stay strong, y'all. And let me know if you need anything. Just hit me up. You can email us at hi@fiveable. Oh my God, I can't spell Fiveable. Fiveable.me. And we like answering questions when you have them. So hit us up. Oh, look, we got 2 more questions. Has Africa ever been unified under a single government? No. So the only time that we even see any sort of like fully African movement would be in the last time period in the 20th century. There's sort of this like Pan-Africanism that's attempting to like unite people through like, as an African culture, but there's never one government that single-handedly like has power over Africa. I'm not even sure what the largest empire in Africa ever was. Maybe Mali. I'm not sure. But like pretty soon after Mali and Songhai, then you get the Europeans that come in and ruin everything. So it's incredible of like what could have been, right? Who knows? Good question though. All right, y'all. It's been real, and I will see you next Monday. And I'm about to check your email in a second. I'm going to send you out the slides. See you later.